Good evening, everyone. I'm just going to leave it 30 seconds or so for everybody to catch up with Wi-Fi mishaps and computer misfires and all the other things that we've got to contend with in this Zoom universe we're living in. And then we'll get cracking with tonight's event. Okay, I'm going to make a start then. So welcome everyone and thanks very much for tuning in this evening. A couple of housekeeping things to start with. Tonight's session is getting recorded, so please don't swear or share any private stuff that you don't want the world to know about, or confidential information about yourselves either. Hopefully at the end of today's session, we'll have time for some Q&A. And comments from you guys as well. So please use the chat function and the Q&A function to pose any questions to our panelists or add any comments to the discussion that you want to add. So welcome to this evening's event, which is going to be a creative exploration of how geography and geology and the earth sciences has impacted and influenced creative writing, and specifically poetry and contemporary poetry. And this also marks the climax of my 12-month project, the Chain Coral Chorus, which was enabled and funded by the University of Wolverhampton, the Doctoral College, and the Early Research Award Scheme. And this has given me the opportunity to take the post as poet in residence for the Black Country Geological Society, where I've been researching and writing about their work and the 40+ geosites that make up the now UNESCO recognised Black Country Geopark. It's been said, sometimes cruelly, that when geologists run out of ideas, they turn to poetry. And likewise, when poetry needs grounding or anchoring, or the necessary tools for digging into life and culture in the Anthropocene, we turn to the earth. I'm joined by 4 really amazing writers who do this in diverse and fascinating ways, and they'll be our tour guides through the different terrains of geopoetry and geopoetics this evening. I'm really pleased to present to you today Tim Creswell, Alison Hallett, Norman Bizzle, and our first act for this evening, a poet from the Northeast who has 8 collections of poetry published in full collections and pamphlet collections from publishers such as Wild Pressed Books and the Blacklight Engine Room. He's been described as a troubadour of the everyday, and his work is driven by the culture, landscape, and voices of his Teesside and Tyneside locale. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the brilliant Harry Gallagher.
Well, thank you very much. I don't know what to do after that lovely introduction. I feel rather overwhelmed. So the rest of you, that you know what's the taste of what's to come now, don't you? He's going to big you up. Thank you all for tuning in. Is not the word, is it? But anyway, thanks for coming along, everybody. Yeah, I'm a poet who is driven largely by locale, really, to use Rob's word. I was born and dragged up in the industrial northeast, where I still live, albeit some miles away from where I'm from. So I'm going to start off with this poem, which I'm always fascinated by. One, the things that people used to have to do for a living, and two, what it does to them and the land. So my poems specifically this evening are structured around that, really. And this first one is about Middlesbrough, my old hometown. Um, and Middlesbrough really is a new town in some ways. 200 years ago, it pretty much wasn't there. There was 18 people lived there in 1825, the census then. And now, of course, it grew and grew and grew. But the reason it grew is because of what was in the hills 4 miles south. The Eston Hills were found to be full of ironstone. And of course, it was the start of the Industrial Revolution in the 1830s and 1840s. Rails needed laying, bridges needed building, roads, all the rest of it, all of that stuff. And Middlesbrough became like the Californian gold rush, except it was an iron rush. And we had no workforce here, but of course it coincided with the famine in Ireland, and so hence my second name Gallagher. Everybody in Middlesbrough is from somewhere else, really, which is ironic, seeing as they voted for Brexit largely on the grounds that you might guess. So anyway, without further ado, the first poem is called. It's a pain really to those Irish people who came over and worked the land and in industry underground or what have you. It's called Moulded from Ferrous. This town was moulded from Ferrous on the backs of the Irish and the miners shipped in from the Southland to these badlands. From the stench of the chimneys to the quench of the bars, lining the streets of a town made of iron, on the bodies of every Patrick and Michael and Rose and Colleen, and the skinned knees and elbows of thousands of children playing and dancing on cobbles and grime. They're building a future in 3/4 time. And down in the King Billy, they're drowning their cares, draining the dregs from the last of the kegs. But while daddies are drinking, mummies are cleaning. While all in the one bed, 4 babies are dreaming of one day maybe's living on the posh side of the rails. But their horizons were made up from choking smoked rails. This town was moulded from Ferrous, and the blood of the Irish, and the pride of its people, and the sinews and sweat of the men underground, and the ashes of all who expired in a furnace. All those Patricks and Michaels, Roses and Colleens, they all burnt their boats on the river of dreams. So yeah, Middlesbrough, moulded from Ferrous. I'm going to move on now to much nearer to where I live now. I now live in North Tyneside. It's about 40 miles north, not that far away really. But around the corner from me, about 3 miles away from me, is a memorial garden which I happened upon by chance, and it's a memorial to a mining disaster. In 1862, 204 men and boys were underground in the mine at New Hartley. Well, it was Hartley, there's New Hartley now. When I'm locating a page, here we are. I'm reading from a book for this one. So in Hartley, there was a pit called the Hester Pit, and it was a January morning, very early doors, and the night shift were about to come up, and the day shift had already gone down to join them, and they were doing a handover thing, and there was another load of them in the cage going down, when suddenly the beam that held the cage up snapped in two. It weighed 46 tons and it plummeted down the mine shaft, wedging the cage in the shaft and trapping all the men and boys underground. And there was only one entrance and exit, and that was it. Frantically, the townsfolk gathered, began almost by hand and then by shovel, digging a second shaft to trying to create a rescue shaft for all the people trapped underground. But it was 400 feet deep. And it took weeks to get down there, and Queen Victoria was concerned. It made national news at the time, and there were no survivors. When they finally got down there, they found the men. They'd all been overcome by gas by that point, and fathers and sons, whole families were wiped out. Fathers and sons were found in each other's arms, and they marked where they all were found. And they'd done things like so that the tin tags that they used for the corbs of coal, the wagons of coal, they'd scoured last messages in them, and now that they saved them, and they're now in a museum. So I thought I'd like to mark that really. And as I say, that they found where they are, and actually, funnily enough, there was a descendant who I made contact with in writing this poem, who had done the research of where his descendants were found underground, and his great whatever it was grandfather was found directly under where this guy lives now, under his house, which I thought was really spooky. So this is the ghosts of Hester. There are voices around the capped off shaft, ghosts of gatherers weighing in the coal, the tally lad, the stopper, a black-faced bairn drowned in his dad's coat, fists knuckling through sleeves, all waiting for the menfolk to fashion a ladder from brittle ferrous flakes embedded in the walls, and climb out into the heaven of a January morning, crisp as starched sheets on a dead man's bed. But everybody knows about the fathers who held sons, suffocating them with love to save the gas a job, where little boys were found in the snuggled underground, grasping daddy's gasping chest. It's now plotted on maps. As deep as the waters drowning the main scene, their shade is absorbed in the existence of a people who just chose the wrong time and place to be born. They now wander a garden they don't recognize, filled up with words that cannot convey the weight nor the reach of a snapped beam's fist. And so there they still dwell, mourning the names of the spared 25, faint as a boy's imprint sitting against a coal face at a sleepy Last Supper, praying for a miracle that never appeared. So yes, the 25 in the poem were the 25 men and boys who weren't underground. It wiped out the entire menfolk from the village, and now they're all buried in one churchyard. If you go around, the age, it shows you what's changed in the world. The age between 10 and 72. So there was old men 72 still work mining underground, and boys of 10 down there. Quite shocking, really, isn't it? But anyway, I'll stop gabbing. I'm going to go to a brand new book now, because since Rob mentioned the books, there's another one just come out. This was of the artist Johnny Hanna, and this is a rather more light one. This is this was written about a Northumberland village I was in a couple of years ago, and it was just on those sort of a bit like today, it's a sort of foggy mornings out in bits of Northumberland, really atmospheric because the old buildings are still there. A lot of the mine heads are still there, and the miners' cottages are certainly all still there. So this is Northumberland morning. It's a bit lighter. In the go-slow, bow-top, pretty mining village, where no one remembers the down-below hollows, the soot-coughed chimney tops are blinking at the sun, peeking cheeky at the starched, stiff, high-picked, crisp white day. Church pews are empty as old birds' nests. Its stained glass beauties speak of suffering and duty, while the streets sweep with people busying towards Monday, the crown of its head rising jewelled and splendid. The newspaper talk is of conmen, lawmen, making laws, raking paws over the dugout spoils of the little people's lives. But the frosted fences, boundaries old as coal, keep it all away. In snuffling sleep, shuffling sheep, dairy farm dawn of a workaday whitewashed Northumberland morn. Northumberland morning. Um, I'm I'm going to cut out the next one because it's too sad to do. I was going to do one, but I'll not do that one. Instead, I'll do one about decay, which is just sad enough in itself anyway, isn't it? But this is inner city decay. So just across from Middlesbrough, there's a place called Dormanstown, still there now. And it was built for the workers of Dorman Long. Dorman Long were the people who built the Tyne Bridge. The Tyne Bridge and the Sydney Harbour Bridge were built in Middlesbrough, as was loads of other stuff all across the world. Dormanstown, now in the wake of the steelworks closed down, is gradually decaying, falling to bits when the people are still living there. That's what this is about. This is Steel Town. In streets erected for steel men, now corroding away amidst brick dust and graffiti, and Shazza Love's Alley, and derelict takeaways that deliver to no one, and broken down bicycles carry ghosts of children, all lost forever in these streets laid out for long dead steel men, whose kids trudged in their footsteps and pledged their allegiance from cradle to grave. And the boxes thrown up in runaway time are now haunted by spirits from the furnace's ashes, home to those whom the steelworks abandoned. They live out their lives on the CCTV, which hangs from the lampposts their forefathers forged in the town where the world was made. Steel Town. I'm going to finish off with now from this is from the pamphlet that Rob mentioned. This is Subterranean, which is all specifically about stuff that's underground. But I thought it might be, rather than industry, I'd read this one, because wherever you go in our country, it is part of our country and our culture, and it was all done by hand. Wherever you go are white horses on the hills, all across certainly England. I've been in, there's loads of them, and a lot of them are from the 17 and 1800s. And I just think it's amidst all of the blackness of industry and the toil and the injury that you risked every minute of your life, and the filth that you lived among in these cottages, in these slums where people had to live, to have the thought to go up on a hillside and create a beautiful thing. It's almost like the working class people used to do, where they'd free the pigeons and the pigeons would fly out, and really your soul would be with the pigeon as it flew free. It's kind of, I think, the same way of white horses. So this is a wee salute. It's only quite a short poem to all of those people and the culture that they created. White horses, thank you very much for listening. With spit, pick and shovel, bit between teeth, the first man to ever dig a chalk horse from a hillside gave rein to a beast that whinnied. Look at me as a signpost, all you John Barleycorns. All across the country, 100 white horses, stilled mid-gallop, weathered, timeless. Through the thick, blunt beat of the factory presses, or first light out of Pithead on your way to Tin Bath, Snap and Soft Bed, you'll see them running, as free as your dreams, and say, this is my home. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Harry. That was brilliant. Absolutely amazing. Harry Gallagher, everyone. Wonderful. And that brings us on very nicely to my next guest, who is a prize-winning poet and Hawthornden Fellow, whose latest books are Toots with Mariscat Press and Walking, Stumbling, Limping, Falling, a conversation with walking artist Phil Smith. Her poetry's been carved into Milsom Street pavement in Bath, into a companion stone in the Peak District, and etched into a library window in Bristol. A commitment to collaboration and embedding text in public places is central to her practice. She's worked and continues to work with dancers and musicians, scientists, visual artists and sculptors. And besides publishing 6 books and pamphlets of poetry, she's also written drama, an audio diary for BBC Radio, an essay on chalk for BBC Radio 3, drama for Sky Television, a book of short stories as well. She has a practice-based PhD in poetry and is a freelance lecturer at the University of West of England and Falmouth University. I'm very proud to give you Alison Hallett.
Hey, thank you so much. Massive thank you to Rob for inviting me to take part in this. And it's just such a pleasure to be sharing the platform with such other amazing writers. And that was so moving, Harry. Thank you. I loved that. I'm speaking to you from a very sunny Bath in the south of England today. And I'm going to talk mainly through slides. But before I go into the images, I'll just say that I'm going to be talking about two books that have come out of two different residencies that I've done. The first was a poet in residence place at the geography department for the University of Exeter in Cornwall. And that was a year long. And then the other residency was at Heriot-Watt University in 2019 in the Lyell Centre, where I worked with geologists and earth scientists. So a book came out of both residencies, and both times the book was an unexpected outcome. And the first one I'm going to talk about is 6 Days in Iceland. So this came out of the residency in Exeter, the University of Exeter. And it's based on a field trip to Iceland. It contains poetry by me, scientific text by the physical geographer, Professor Chris Castledine, and the photographs are by me and some of the students. So I just wanted to say as an overview that the residencies are really interesting places. And certainly with the field trip to Iceland, quite a lot of the students wondered what on earth a poet was doing with them. They thought I had no place in amongst all the science that was about to happen. And I think more than anything, the conversations and exchanges that take place are invaluable. And the questions around how we can enrich each other's observations, understandings, and vocabularies. So I'm going to share my screen and go straight into some poems. So let's play from the start. So here are the two books, 6 Days in Iceland and Tilted Ground. And I'll start with 6 Days in Iceland. And first off, I'm going to read a quote from the beginning of the book. This comes from a landscape architecture journal called Topos. If you don't know it, it's quite an amazing journal. In Icelandic, we don't talk about cultivating the soil. We say adjöka jordina. The verb adjöka means to write poetry. When we put seeds into the soil, we therefore tend to think of it as making poems from the soil. We are making poetry of the land. We are writing the land. And when we pick flowers, we call it ad lesa blom. The verb lesa means to read. We are reading the flowers. So that's from Topos. And my first poem is here, Thinking of Iceland. Chris counsels us to think of Iceland as flat. Even the mountains are flat, he says, when you see them as layer upon layer of lava. Generations of flatness inhabited by trolls, outcrops of horizontal time. Then he counsels us to think south, not north, to unhitch the island from a European mind, connect it with the Arctic's southernmost tip. We place ourselves there, the sea's currents fat with cod, herring, radioactivity from decommissioned warships. So I put this one in because it would never have occurred to me to think of Iceland as flat. It's covered in volcanoes. And also this suggestion of unhitching the island from a European mind. So this is one of the things I love about collaborating with scientists, is the introduction of these ideas and thoughts that I would never otherwise have come across. The next poem I'm going to read from, I read a long poem called Atlas of Iceland in 19 pages. And I'm going to read an excerpt from this. I'm going to read 3 of the pages. Page 1. I move a stone and everything changes. Me, the stone, the earth that held the stone, water that runs through earth, root of birch, mash of moss, lichen. The map undulates across this frozen land. Behind us, in the retreating ice, 2 dead bodies are waiting to be delivered. Page 2. They say a glacier gives back the things it takes, that it will not hold them forever. So far, this one at Skaftafell has given the remains of a tent, 2 backpacks, 1 pair of trousers, 1 pair of socks, ski bindings, wood from the skis, pan and handle, hammerhead, crampons, goggles, spanner, toothbrush. It has not yet given us Ian Harrison and Tony Prosser, students from Nottingham University doing fieldwork in 1953. It has so far refused to relinquish their bodies. So I guess this is one of the things that I can do in exchange is record things. And curiously with this, I was in Sydney a couple of years after this residency, and I met a poet who had trained as a geologist at Nottingham and who knew these 2 students. And this led to quite an exchange with Nottingham University as well, and retrieving articles from the archives about these 2 students whose bodies are still buried in the ice somewhere. So next I'd like to talk about the residency at the Lyell Centre, Heriot-Watt University. And one of my delights here was going into the core store. These cores are only brought out twice a year, so I was very lucky to see them. And they're drilled from up to 9 miles inside the earth. And one of the really striking things about them was the smell of oil, which I'm not going to speak about at this point, but it was quite overwhelming. So I'm going to read you one of the cores poems. I wrote 7 cores poems, and this is cores 4. I am unexpectedly invited to taste a rock. Bite off a corner, Andy says, a Sussex texture with your teeth, your tongue. I wonder if he's joking. He's not. I lift the 200-million-year-old meal to my mouth, nibble limestone from the Fulmar bed. Gritty, slightly bitter. I'm eating the earth, I say. It's science, he says. It's a menu of stone, I say, as I swallow the planet and spin through space. So one of the things I really like about being in residence is the potential for getting up to a bit of mischief. And from that, you see the kind of arguments that can happen. To Andy, it was obvious that this was science. And to me, it was like, well, it's a menu. So I love the clash of different ways of seeing and what can then come out of that. And one of the things that I'm really interested in is a phrase that I'll borrow from Donna Haraway, which is making kin. I'm very interested in how we make kin with stones. And one of the things I was really keen on in the course was to be able to place human beings in the continuum. So I asked the 2 lecturers, Andy and Helen, if they would lie down and be part of this continuum of cause. And again, it's one of the things I found working with scientists. There's often quite a lot of humor when we're working and making experiments together. So one thing that I learned, it's really tiny, is putting the finger in the picture so you get a sense of scale. So this was on the field trip up in Kirkcaldy, little poem, Crinoid, backbone of a sea lily stashed in rock, little song that can't stop singing. And next, I just want to talk a little bit about a lecture that I was invited to about carbon storage at the Sleipner Reservoir. I decided to read an article about this before I went along, and I had a very particular image of what a reservoir would be. I thought it would be, filled with water and a few ducks on it and perhaps some, remote control boats. We were talking about a completely different kind of reservoir, way underground, and the reservoir being the porosity of rocks. Anyway, I read the article and I didn't understand a single word. And so I decided to allow myself the joy of incomprehension, to just really sit with not understanding for a while. And what I did with that was I sampled words from the article. And then again, I imagined maybe what people were doing when they were making this research or writing it up, and I mixed the 2 things together. So I'm going to read a poem, Plume of My Seismic Time-Lapse Dreams. And there's a quote at the beginning from a filmmaker, Imran Peretta. And he says, if something is complex, don't try to simplify, but make it more complex instead. And I'm just going to show you an image of a fossilized river while I read this. Plume of my seismic time-lapse dreams. It was a seismic time-lapse lullaby, a reservoir performance with stars that couldn't be seen. It was conformance, a walnut that wouldn't crack. Divergent outcomes swirled like galaxies adrift in a parallel universe. It was a storage site operator, a list of rules, a flask of oxtail soup, data sets acquired from the minds of machines, dogs walked at midnight. Baseline predictive models evolved through evenings of whiskey and wine. It was a time-lapse seismic plume, a lullaby with robust geometry, pressures, boreholes, top seals, potatoes, figs, topography, an axisymmetric migration of eels. We sang, "We love you," to babies and fossils. It was a seismic time-lapse lullaby. It was strongly undulatory. And I'm going to read one more poem in relation to this reservoir. I wrote a few, but I wanted to show some sense of progression here where I finally started to understand what this reservoir was. And it happened when I was packing my suitcase. And most people, I'm sure, have had this experience where you're packing a suitcase that's already full and you've still got more things to get in there. And somehow you managed to do that. So this is my final poem, then I've got one more image to show you. And this is called Packing an Already Full Suitcase Leads to a Momentary Understanding of Carbon Storage. As I squeezed a tube of vitamin C into a space that couldn't be seen, but was surely there, I thought of carbon storage and the long, long pipes pumping it underground into a reservoir that's not one vast empty space, but a series of small interlinked voids. Next, I wondered if we were packing Earth like a suitcase and getting ready to leave, or designing a future where we'd be able to breathe. Deep rock, sweet rock, rock that holds us up in the galaxy like an emerald to the sun. And I thought I would show you this to finish. This is Pat Corbett, the geologist who organized the residency I was on, obviously holding up the fossilized river here. And again, just that sense of play that can come about on a residency, and which I think, leads to all sorts of discoveries and questions. And as a resident, because I have very little knowledge, I can sometimes be quite a fool and ask questions that other people can't. And anyway, I think I just wanted to say here that, one of my primary interests is blurring these edges between science and art and between what's human and what's not human. So thank you very, very much for listening. And I look forward to hearing the next poets. Thank you.
Excellent. That was absolutely amazing, Alison. Thank you so much for sharing your work and those beautiful, beautiful images as well. Looks like we've got some nice comments coming in already. Samantha is saying that it's interesting to see that the claiming of human life by the Earth in some of the readings that you just gave us as well. So wonderful, wonderful stuff. And so you can see, everyone, now that we're starting to shift from the human geography and the sense of movement and life lived within a location with Harry Gallagher down into the rocks and the movements of the Earth with Alison's work. And our next act is going to kind of explore some of the sort of philosophical underpinning of the way that these things work as well. So third on the bill this evening is an ex-principal history teacher with an MA in history and philosophy. He founded the Open World Poetics Group and is the director of the Scottish Centre for GeoPoetry. His first poetry collection, Slate Sea Sky, features poems written in his native Glasgow and the Isle of Lewing in Argyll. And his novel Barnhill explores George Orwell's experiences on the island during the writing of 1984. He's someone who's also been very warm, patient, and giving to me over the last 12 months, for which I'm very grateful. My third guest is the monumental Norman Bissell.
Well, that's quite an introduction. Monumental. I'll take that. Thanks very much, Rob. It's a pleasure, absolute pleasure, to join you for this culmination of your work over the last year or more. And I'm very pleased that to welcome others who are tuning in tonight and enjoying the poetry, I hope, as much as I am. I'm going to show some slides, and as well as, sorry, wrong one. I'm going to show some slides and talk, but I seem to have lost my slides, so bear with me a few minutes, would you? It seems to have, here we go. No. That's a problem. Could you keep us going a minute or two, Rob, while I look for this?
Absolutely. You just give me a nod when you're ready, Norman, and I will jump in and share a poem while we're looking for this. As I mentioned at the top of this event, I'm currently the poet in residence for the Black Country Geological Society. And some of my interests over the last few years, really, including my PhD research at the University of Wolverhampton, was deeply focused and indebted to the work of the environmental psychologists, particularly Harold Prushansky and his work on place identity. I'm very, very interested in the way that the different elements of place dance and sort of ping off each other, like a spider's web almost. That sort of gymnastics display of bus routes and buildings and people and litter and grasslands and seas and rivers and schools and family and memory all kind of collide in these different ways that bring about a spirit of place. And my work over the last sort of 12 months has really been focusing on trying to get down to the bedrock of that place and where that sort of dance or web of place identity comes from. And again, obviously with a focus on my hometown and locale, the Black Country and Dudley. So I'll share this poem with you as a sort of warm up for that. It's called Through Filth, and it's based in the Dudley tunnels, the tunnels that run underneath Dudley, that were really important sites of geological heritage and industrial heritage. Through filth. Descend with me mucker, down below grounds of Pagnell's Priory. Here hides the rhizome echo of Cluniac monks and their prayer, enkindled, inflamed, like our own smithy's scorched core to gem, sand to glass, dust to daggers, smelt by quilting silver fingers and nail-mecking kins full of ken for our caverns. These caverns, descend with me mucker, descend down below renner roots and lime where the cut chain links Nidhogg, Yggdrasil to corner shop, call centre, from chain coral helixing revelations to brackets, a battleship, ghost ship, colony, empires omivering and overing here, sending out canting wisps at caggy-headed scrappies, older than God time. Attend, moist ore moves in slow spit-splitting Fermi, firm as fossil, cold as core, There are Svedberg, scuttles in here, just patient sediments with the brood, a halcite, silica shale, tracks of tabulite ordering roots for proto-beans and proto-action. Down here, with the stone and slick sand fertilizers for Steeler, glass mecha, almost teen lad with armor, with chisel, with lens to spy crinoid ruins, insect set in geo-nest, attend. Here rests the Dudley bug, Moloch. It's our slow burn municipal crest. Electra protects brave chests in protean soils and lets us swarm in Storcere in Venator. Thank you very much. Was that enough breathing space for you, Norrie?
I hope so. I'm going to try and share the screen now. It doesn't, yeah. Let's see if it's up there. Can you see that now? I've shared the screen.
Yeah, we can see your screen. We just need to make your slides a bit bigger. There we go. Yeah. Okay
now. Well, thanks for your patience and thanks for helping me out there, Rob. I'm going to talk a bit about geopoetics and I'm also going to read some of my own poems. And the first poem I'm going to read is the title poem of my collection, Slate, Sea and Sky. An island on the rim of the world, in that space between slate, sea and sky, where air and ocean currents are plays of wild energy and the light changes everything. So that poem, I hope, gives you some indication of the sort of territory that geopoetics inhabits. But the first thing I want to say about geopoetics is that it creatively expresses the earth in a variety of ways. Poetry, of course, is very important and indeed central to geopoetics, but it also can be expressed, the earth can also be expressed in a whole variety of arts, visual arts, music, oral expression, and in the sciences and in philosophy, and indeed in combinations of the arts, sciences, and thinking. And the little image that you see on the screen there is the cover of a composition that a composer, Liz Lane, made for brass band, a recording that went out by a brass band, a prize-winning by brass band that Liz Lane did, inspired by that little title poem. Next poem tries to again give you some insight into what geopoetics is about. When you go out into the world, try to use all your senses. Touch and taste wild thyme, smell hawthorn and kelp, watch herring gulls soar, listen to the sound of the sea. Above all, open your mind, and who knows what you will find. And that's a very important part of geopoetics. It's a way of perceiving and being in the world, living in the world, as well as a world outlook. It involves using all our senses and our knowledge to try to become more attuned to the world, something which we tend to be separated from sometimes by our forgetfulness almost. It's a transdisciplinary world outlook which seeks to develop a sense of world. As Rob said, the poems in Slate, Sea and Sky begin in the city. I was born and brought up and lived most of my life in Glasgow. Glasgow's, I suppose, a post-industrial city to some extent now, but I remember when it was a very industrial city. This one's called Street Sounds. I long for silence, but no silence comes. Day and night, cars and buses screech past my door, house music for the city dweller. Partick is in my bones. I lived up a close which reeked of welding leathers on men from the yards who thronged Dumbarton Road. But the other day at the corner of Peel Street, the noise of the traffic and the builders' hammers near drove me crazy. In the supermarket, it was no better. Chimes and commands for checkout 5 soon had me scurrying home to empty my mind. Still, the question remains, how to find silence in the midst of street sounds, how to empty the mind in such a cluttered space. So geopoetics, a few more definitions, if you like, or aspects of geopoetics. It places the earth at the center of our experience. It cares about the earth and seeks to conserve all its life forms. It develops a heightened awareness of the earth of which we are part. It seeks to overcome the separation of mind and body and of human beings from the more than human world. It learns from others who have attempted to leave the motorway of Western civilization. This is another city poem, which I wrote when I was living in Glasgow. It's called The Ears Have It. Sitting on the number 9 bus on my way to the writing feast, sitting at the back, I couldn't help but see a man with the most enormous ears you have ever seen. Thick and reddish purple they were, those ears, spotted from the rear of the number 9 bus. Thick and fleshy and soft enough, you felt with finger and thumb you'd love to give them a really good tweak. Huge, pudgy, malleable ears you could chew on most happily for many a happy hour. The left flap even wider than the right, along Dumbarton Road, Balshagray, near translucent in the window light. We got off at Partick Bridge and flew upriver, those ears and I, to Kelvin Grove, looked down and peed on Spalding from a great height. Julian, not Gray, I'm sure you know. We crossed over Kelvin Way and alighted on the bandstand, much benighted, to proclaim, we're here because we're ears, and we're no moving, nae privateers here. It'll no be a strike or a working, thank the Lord. It's a sitting, and there will be no bevying. Either will you, sellout bastard, away and write your lies for the daily scum. So on to Spires at Gilmore Hill we sat, feeling much better for maist of that. All eyes and ears for the city, stretching out afore us, where we had dreamed that one day we'd flap up and fly away. A few more pointers about geopoetics. It's an international movement. It has geopoetics centres in all round different parts of the world, all trying to apply geopoetics in their research and in their creative lives. It opens the possibility of radical cultural renewal for us all as individuals, and indeed for society as a whole. This book, The Radical Field by Tony McManus, who founded the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics in 1995, is the best introduction to geopoetics and the work of Kenneth White in the English language. Kenneth White founded the International Institute of Geopoetics in 1989 and has written many essay books and poems and what he calls way books over many years. This is where I live in Cullerpool, the village, conservation village of Cullerpool on the west coast of Lyng. It looks over to the long coast of Mull that you can see there. And this is one of the poems I wrote when I first got the cottage. The cottage I live in is on the right-hand corner of your picture there. You get a full view of the side of the house there. This poem is called Wind and Water. This day, steady drizzle fills potholes and puddles, runs off shiny grey roofs, slithers down roan pipes, clots into stanks and pools, drips down the back of your neck. The green quarry pool quietly fills. Gulls sail through smour, their big languid wings alight on circled ripples. A wild westerly's getting up. We curry in tighter round spitting fires. You have to go with the weather here, says Ian. But what more could you want than this? Some folk go on about the winter, about the rain and the wind and the cold, but I like it fine here in the winter. This'll do me. Do you think you'll ever live here? Oh, I'm sure I will one day, says I. These houses deserve to be lived in. So they do, you're right. These houses deserve to be lived in, right enough. Good feng shui. Feng means wind and shui means water. And when I was still living in Glasgow and I described this cottage that I was going to live in to my Chinese herbal medicine man, Dr. Chen, he said, good feng shui. So I've always associated his comment with that poem. Now, yesterday, 4 of us went out in a boat, a speedboat, to Ileach, also known as Holy Isle. It's one of the Garvalach Isles to the west of Mull and closer to, to the west of Lyng and closer to Mull. It was the site of where Brandon, the monk, came to Ileach before Columba came to Iona. And what you're looking at on the top right picture there is 2 beehive cells, which are almost identical to the ones that you see off Kerry in Ireland at Skellig Michael. And this poem is about those beehive cells and Ileach. Nahin Ban. Long hours he would sit in his cell, with the wind howling around him, enclosed by the walls he had built, tapering into the centre. The only light from 2 slatted holes beamed into his blank space. His calloused hands told him how thick those walls were, but he preferred it here to the company of the other monks. He'd left the old land and the fishing to get away from the distractions of others, and here, on this rocky outpost of the white martyrdom, he would not be changing his ways now. He still fished and farmed in order to live, and he would pray and sing with the rest of them. But most of his time was spent here in solitude, contemplating life and death, or up there on the ridge, with the gulls wheeling and crying above him, peering over that sheer drop at the big surf that came crashing in from the west. This is what he had come for, just to be here, alone on a rugged isle, to live under that wide open sky, to watch the stars at night and wonder at their wanderings, to be with all of this, and of all of this is what he had come for, to the spare isle of the sea. On the left-hand picture there, you can see a view of where the monastery was constructed after Brendan moved on. in his voyages. And the big island in the background there is Scarba. And round the corner from it is Jura, where Orwell wrote his famous novel 1984. So what about the future of the Scottish Centre for GeoPoetics? Well, it's working with both individuals and other centres, and indeed with some universities, to organise events and try to develop geopoetics further. Theoretical work is ongoing, and we hold bi-monthly Zoom conversations, and we aim to intervene in COP26 in Glasgow in November. And I seem to have a bit of a curse when it comes to Zoom conversations, but we're persevering, and we'll be having another one on the visual arts and geopoetics at the end of July. So it's an organisation that anyone's welcome to join and to take part in its activities. So we believe there is radical hope for the future in geopoetics. This book here, Grounding a World, which I co-edited, is if you join it, you get a free copy. And Slate Sea Sky below there is my poetry collection in hardback and softback. And these are the websites of the GeoPoetics organization and my own website, which you're very welcome to have a look at, and drop me a note if you feel like doing so. So thank you very much for listening and for your patience at the outset. I hope that's given you some insight into geopoetics and into the kind of poetry that I write. Thanks again.
Thank you very much, Norman. That's really wonderful. Some really, really wonderful stuff there. Let me just... can we just get you to... yeah, there we are. We're back again. Lovely. Thank you. Let me scoot along a little bit then and do some more poems of my own. For those that don't know me, my name is Rob Francis, Dr. Rob Francis. I'm one of the lecturers in creative and professional writing here at the University of Wolverhampton. And as I said, I'm the poet in residence for the Black Country Geological Society. And it's, as I said before, that this interest in environmental psychology and the way that that might impact narrative thrust and poetic drama and dynamics has led me down into the ground and down into the geology of the region as well. And it's investigating the stratigraphic lay of the land and the makeup of the rocks underneath that have given rise to the cultures that have preceded it and will eventually leave before it as well. Has given me what Kenneth White called a topographic presence, or a topological reverie of these sites as well. And it's that sort of led me towards geopoetics. So I want to share a couple more poems with you before we move on to our headline guest for this evening, with these ideas in mind of digging into the earth and considering the way that the fossil-rich and mineral-rich grounds that are always present, always right on our doorsteps, but always also overlooked. And as Norman mentioned, we're sort of dislocated from in our modern thinking or blinkered approach to modernity. Let me share a few poems with you based on these ideas. This first one I'm going to give you is a poem called Coalescence. Just spring, the last leaves left from autumn's mulching leak into pig iron grounds, grey whack, fire clay, ironstone, sit turbid at Netherton Spa, where dog walkers and rambling clubs and pinfold teens and locked-in pensioners sense the spectral gravity beneath feet, It seems to whine at the fly-tipped waist. It takes it into itself, and the buds from bramble, damson, white rheum from eyes between quick flash of bluebell, snowdrop, rheum drips in Dalton caverns, as in weeping elms and human pores. This land leaves them colloidal. We suspend. Thank you very much. That little high-pitched voice in the background was my daughter Elsbeth saying, wishing me a good night. She always seems to wait until it's my turn to do the talking before she interrupts these things. Maybe I should, based on that, skip forward to a few poems that is sort of based on her and my relationship with the land and the geosite as well then. Because so much of my residency has been spent in lockdown and, you know, we weren't able to sort of see family, and that cut off childcare for me in lots of ways. Elsie ended up sort of coming along with me in lots of these field trips. So she features in quite a lot of these poems. So I'm going to give you two now, which are inspired by William Blake, the great romantic, and the Wren's Nest geosite, which is one of the most significant nature reserves and sites of geological wonder that you're ever going to step into. Little girl lost. She scrambles sunken hoarstones, grass-verged Snaefell's Ness, dotting Northercote Farm, her toddler toes tracking labile Pleistocene, Norfolk blacks in guinea fowl, flock dew-drenched field, staccato pluckings scattered above, knocker grounds where she scales shrouded lithologies. Dad repeats, careful, slowly, easy, careful, then hears himself in protean conjugations and stops, smiles, watches a second of time martyr in tantric tremor. The earth rises from sleep, from caverns deep, where life conveyed. And its sister poem, Little Girl Found. Tabuli colonies, helix in plankton hunts, almost still, almost silent, mirrors fresh covens of fungi, sharing overlooked ground now dried across eranthums. Our girl, in her own pullulation, collects stoned arthropods from dried beds. We spent toddlerdom place stamping wayfind skills. Her laughs when her turns around her does. Our wench loves the spiral unravelling in mapping stray roots home. Blake's little girl found finds herself in father's footsteps, helixed in every inch and pore. Even absent from each, they slink in tune to chain coral's infinite coda. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. I hope you've enjoyed those poems, and there's plenty more to read and see on my blog, The Chain Coral Chorus. If you stick Chain Coral Chorus into an internet search, you'll find me, as well as some really great guest blogs that are there and more coming up. But let's shift into our headline slot for this evening. Our headline act this evening is Professor Tim Creswell. Tim is a human geographer and poet and the Ogilvy Professor of Human Geography at the University of Edinburgh, having formerly served as the Dean of the Faculty and Vice President for Academic Affairs at Trinity College, Hartford, Connecticut. He's the author of 6 books on the role of place and mobility in cultural life, co-editor of 4 collections, and the inaugural editor, managing editor of the journal GeoHumanities. Tim Creswell is also a poet and the author of 3 really significant and important collections, all published by Penned in the Margins. Soil from 2013, Fence from 2015, and last year's, well, my pick of last year's poetry collections, Plastaglomerate. And it's these three collections that, in my estimation, are really putting Creswell's work out there as one of the most significant contemporary poets working in the UK at the moment. So it gives me great pleasure to give you Tim Creswell.
Thank you very much. And yeah, I see what you mean about living up to the introductions and living up to the rest of the poems that have been read today. I mean, it's extraordinary, and hopefully there will be some echoes and shadows and connections made between the things people have been doing. I actually was walking across the meadows in Edinburgh just the other day, and I saw a T-shirt that said "GeoPoetry will save the world," and I thought that must be something to do with Norman. I don't know. Or maybe it was him. I wouldn't recognize him at the time. It was a red T-shirt. It had "GeoPoetry will save the world." And I just couldn't. I almost stopped and wanted to take a photo. So, you know, as a geographer who's written poetry for a long time, and as a poet who's geographical, I do think a lot about geo. And so this has been mentioned. Geo means the Earth, and Earth means both the planet and the soil. And so there's a lot of resonances between these different meanings of the word geo, and then poetry or geography means earth writing. So poetry that is about the earth is earth writing too, and poetry of course is making, so, or poetics is making, so geopoetics is making the earth. And I'd like to think about the poems as making places of various kinds, as well as being about places, and the combination of the two things. I'm going to read one poem from Soil, which is my first collection. It's been they were reissued, the three books by Pen in the Margin. So the first two books were reissued this year in new editions with lovely matching covers. They all look like they were fancy Penguin books once upon a time, which I quite like. Anyway, this is from Soil. It's called Phase Shift, and it's an attempt to sort of fold in geological time into everyday life in London, where I lived at the time. A light turns on. Through a window, a man in shorts is ironing. Two towers stand dark against the Acton evening. Red tiled roofs, terracotta chimney pots, a line of lights sinking in strict tempo to Heathrow beyond the spires and office blocks. The man is folding shirts. His life marked by the widespread presence of mammals and flowering plants. The rumble of a skateboard, the humdrum of cars on the Westway. He is a geological force to be reckoned with. The door closes behind him, the light still on. A cat creeps along a wall top, across the road, down an alley. Sodium lights pop. The street submits to echoes and foxes. In the morning, the dustbin men appear with their day glow and intricate systems in a place that could spend millions of years buried, and still blackbirds wake me up in spring in this city that reveals through crushed structures that it is unlike melancholy, for instance. So in the middle of this book, there is a poem called Soil that, you know, I think I read it once aloud. It goes on a long way. I'm not going to do it today. But it is about thinking about soil and how soil has been connected to, you know, fascism, basically, or sort of the idea of blood and soil, the idea of a deep connection to the soil that one ethnic group possesses. And that idea is based on soil being this sort of deep, and fairly unmoving thing. And so the poem sequence, the poem I'm not going to read, really sort of shifts that around and reflects on how much soil is a moving thing. It moves up and down in vertical ways, and it moves sideways through wind deposition and erosion and all kinds of other processes. And so if you might want to have a look one day, it's sort of about those relationships between coming and going, staying and moving. And I think that theme of staying and moving is really central to all the three collections. It's about the relationships between the boundaries we make and the boundaries we cross. The second book, Fence, is also something I can't read because it's the whole book. And that is about a fence in Svalbard. When I visited Svalbard as part of the Nowhere Island exhibition with Alec, the poet, the artist Alex Hartley before the 2012 Olympics. And again, in that book, there's a fence seemingly bizarrely in the middle of nowhere, 80 degrees north, that it turns out is a fence to protect an old grave of whalers from tourists who, while I was there, weren't there, but in the summer do go there. And it sort of reflects on moving rocks and rocks being moved in and out of Svalbard, and the whales and the whale oil, and how the exploitation of that particular set of islands that seem like on the margins of everywhere fueled, the world as it lit up at night through the whale oil that was produced from the whales. So this is Plastiglomerate, the new collection. And I'm just going to read the first poem first, which sort of introduces us to the combination of natural force and human force. Rialto Beach, which by the way is a beach on in Washington State in the USA. And it's the most amazing spectacle if you ever go there. It just seems like a complete, well, hopefully the poet will tell you what it's like. The poem, Rialto Beach. First, the carnage. Silver white trees, wave toppled and gale gusted, strewn along the beach, sun-bleached dinosaur bones. Next, the balancing acts of stone stacks. A lone conifer clings to invisibly thin soil. Knots of bull kelp, fetid and fly-ridden, anemones in rock pools beckon me to finger their sticky tongues. A bald eagle circles, hounded by ravens. We keep on holding on, hoping for the best, settling for something like circumstance. In the black basaltic sand, mingled with milk white and amber agates, smooth ground sea glass jewels, among the fallen trunks, chunks of rusted ship iron, scattered fishing floats, a plastic buoy. A walker tells me of the wreck, the Chilean ship, the marker around the headline for the drowned. And the second poem here is the title poem, and it's called Plastiglomerate. And a plastiglomerate is a rock that mold which has plastic in it. Basically, it's where plastic has been left in some place, and usually with sand, and has been exposed to heat, usually through, well, originally in Hawaii where it was originally discovered, through lava flows, but sometimes through campfires or other things. And the rock then includes the plastic in it, and it was given this name by a geologist who discovered it in Hawaii, a plastiglomerate. All-purpose cobalt polypropylene rope sluiced overboard by Tom, 10 days out with the tuna fleet, missing Meg and local radio. Ground down shells, clams and cowries, orange-lipped lava flows. The toothbrush Esme shared before she spat foam into the breakers. Bleached, pummeled coral, thin plastic forks from when you barbecued hot dogs on driftwood fire. Fucked on the foreshore. Shared photos of your children, a braided black basalt, green beads of olivine, the chewed blue cap of the $1 biro that leaked in the heat of my pocket. Forest fire, 23% contained, 55-gallon polydrum, waiting for rain. So that's over on the west coast of the US, and further west in the US from West Washington will take you to Alaska. And you may remember the story of all the walruses that went to look for ice and there wasn't any. So they had to get up onto the ground. They call it a haul out in walrus terms. These these are increasingly happening as the ice isn't there anymore when they expect it to be. This is called Haul Out. Finding no ice in the Chukchi Sea, 35,000 walruses hauled out and huddled near Point Lay, Alaska, with its Cold War radar array and 247 souls, 6 of whom are Latino or Hispanic, which makes me wonder how they got there and why. The walruses bellow, snore, walk with their teeth, while taking turns diving deep, whiskering for mollusks, whose numbers are declining like the Kukpagruk, who dwindled down to 2 thanks to Yankee whaling ships, disease and decimation. Here come the helicopters and cameramen clamoring for coverage, risking a stampede. The walruses hunker down, waiting for a freeze up. And traveling over to the east coast of Canada, one of the places I had the joys of visiting when you could visit places, was Newfoundland and St. John's. St. John is a town on Newfoundland, which is a beautiful little place. It looks like places might look like in Scotland. I mean, it's not Scottish people who travel across there, and Irish people, and has a great folk tradition, and like a bazillion poets all live there. It's like where they go to live. So you can meet poets, just go for a beer and you'll meet poets, and you'll share poems. And I had a good, a welcome excursion with the great guide, Don Mackay, who's a fantastic poet of rocks in Canada. And based on that excursion he took me on, I wrote this poem, Newfoundland. A woman in St. John's says she likes my scarf in a chock-full bookshop called Afterwards. It's a thing to get shit-faced on George Street. A band called Quaker Parents plays at the Ship. People sound Irish. The cod have long gone, but now there's oil. There is dark rock, thick fog, and thin soil. To belong for a while, out-of-towners can drink screech, kiss a cod, and repeat after them, "Deed I is me, old cock, and long may your big jib draw." I can't count the times I've flown over, sleepless, beat, following the blue plane on the seat's back moving map. 31,000 feet, counting down the miles. In December, 0 degrees, unlikely clear blue sky. I'm driven in a battered Subaru past the jelly bean homes to Cape Spear. Sea churns froth against the rocks. A hollow-eyed bunker stares down the grey Atlantic. 2 lighthouses, one old, one new. My companion, a lanky local with scraggly beard, recites the names of capes and coves, Portugal Cove, Cuckold Cove, Quiddy Viddy, Cape Despair. He speaks of moose on Water Street, synclines, anticlines, short-tailed weasels, iron mines, and the comforting absence of bears. Back past Signal Hill, across the barrens and into the boreal forest. Above, 4, 5, 6 white trails of planes flying straight in loose formation, following an aerial highway west. So back to the rocks, one of the things that interests me is the way the horrible things we do to the world can also be beautiful. And one of the things I remembered or had an experience of doing was climbing spoil heaps in South Wales that have been reclaimed and covered in grass and made into essentially a tourist attraction with like heritage sites to commemorate mining. So we've had a bit of mining and underground life here. So this is spoil. Spoil marks the old deep mines beneath the terraces and gorse, too smooth for wind-battered, ice-pucked land, birthed from under where blackened hands excavated anthracite. Useless slag slurry and stone shale landslip, tailing dung heaps of the origins of industry, dumped by some incontinent Goliath after the good stuff's been extracted. Ruin and plunder, kilowatts created, steam trains, ships sent on their way, central heating, crimson sunsets, rain-stripped trees, rivers break their banks, snowdrops in December, melting ice, lost birds spiral past the mine museum, picnic spots. Oh my God, the view. And this is Erratic, a poem about rocks that are found a long way from where they started. Basically, they've moved away from where their bedrock is, usually by ice or water. Well, technically speaking, you could say by us too. An erratic could be an anthropogenic erratic. I don't know if I've invented that term, but it sounds like a good one. But this is called erratic. Again, it's things that travel across, it travels, mobility and place are the two things I work with. So this is what's important to me. Sitting there for all the world as if you own the place, an error, bluestone among chalk, wanderer, heretic, stowaway suspended as the world warmed, leaving you upended, culture shocked and supersized. Your crystals milky, opaque, glittering, brimming with another kind of winter, fire and freeze, 10,000 years of exile, now part of the scenery. So there are two more poems I wanted to read. I don't know, would you rather we stopped and had a chat, or I don't know how we're doing for time?
I think more work, Tim.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So this is called Friendly Floaties / TripAdvisor. And it was constructed by following the course of ducks, plastic toys, ducks and other things that escaped the container-shaped evergreen everlaurel when containers tipped overboard in 1992, when it was en route between Hong Kong and Tacoma, Washington. And climatologists and others have followed the plastic bath toys around the world to see how currents work. And there's a kind of whole site you can go on where people are finding them and they're collected in different places. So I found out where they'd gone, and then I looked up TripAdvisor on beaches where they've been found, then look up TripAdvisor ratings of beaches. And I took language from the TripAdvisor reviews of these beaches to construct this poem. And it follows them in kind of chronological order around the route. At Sitka, Alaska's second annual Beachcomber Fair, Dean Orbison and his son Tyler exhibited 111 plastic frogs, turtles, beavers, and ducks they had found between 1993 and 2004. Take some time, enjoy the beach. The stream was full of salmon, very cool. Counted 17 bald eagles. Bears are sighted every year, loaded with totem poles, Sitka history, at low tide, rocks with barnacles galore, some bluish shells, singing ravens, super sour huckleberries, beach, forest, totems, humpback whales hanging out. Kids can have fun in tide pools. Tlingit culture, informative film. You might get to see a crane or two, the best of all worlds. On the Queen Charlotte Islands in British Columbia, Guthrie Schweers found 2 blue turtles and 4 green frogs. This was 1995. What can I say? The drive there is spectacular. Loved walking on the beach, saw unknown sea creatures. A beautiful place to unplug, listen. Eagles galore, many shorebirds, go hunting for agates. Beaches are endless, razor clams, plentiful, very zen. If you wander far enough, you will also find fossils, a backdrop of rainforest, reconnecting with yourself. Waves and storms reveal more, lots of neat rock. It doesn't get much better. In July 2003, Beth Higgins and Wayne Welton spotted a yellow duck in the west end of Gooch's Beach in Maine. Get there by 9 to find a parking spot, our all-time favorite. There are waves, not huge and scary, a great place to bodyboard. All the beauty of a bigger beach. Sand dollars at low tide, some live crabs, kids enjoying hot dogs. I wasn't sure what kind of sunset I would get. Sidewalks nice and wide. Collecting sea glass is a fun activity. Tranquility is best. Water getting closer and closer. Horizon goes on forever. Sonali Naik, an English barrister, found a green frog on egg sands while holidaying in the Isle of Lewis in the Hebrides in 2006. Sometimes when you set out on a journey, you wonder. Single track roads, light blue sea, miles of white sand, no warning signs whatsoever. At low tide, you can wander almost the whole way across. Immaculately clean, plenty of space. Free parking, great for flying kites, a must visit. Pink orange rock of the type I've seen in Iona. Hold hands and beachcomb. Kids cried and were soaked. Adults loved it. A long way from anywhere, that end of the world feel. Hard to find directions, but worth it when you get there. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
That was brilliant. Thank you very much. That was Tim Creswell, everyone. And that very nicely brings us to a close this evening. So I will just finish up with a few extra thank yous. Thank you for everyone that's tuned in this evening and taken the time out to sort of creatively explore this with us this evening, with the ways that the earth sciences and geology and geography can kind of come together with poetry in different ways. So we're really, I think I speak on behalf of everyone that we really appreciate everyone's time for that. This event was brought to you this evening by the Centre for Transnational and Transcultural Research, which is one of the research strong arms of the School of Humanities here at the University of Wolverhampton. And as I mentioned at the top of today's event, it has been part of my early research award scheme project, the Chain Coral Chorus, and so that has had funding from the doctoral college as well. And that leaves me to say once again a huge thank you to Harry Gallagher, Alison Hallett, Tim Creswell and Norman Bissell, and hope we all get a chance to do this again sometime soon, and hopefully face to face too. I wish you all a very good evening and thank you once again. Take care now.